It all began on a bright morning that felt like any other. People were going to work, children were rushing to school, and the world was moving at its usual pace. But then something strange appeared in the sky, something that didn't belong there. At first, most thought it was just a comet or maybe a new satellite being launched. The object looked like a silver tear floating above the clouds, silent and glowing, but soon more of them appeared. Hundreds of silver shapes spreading across the skies of every continent. For a few minutes, the world stopped. Cars pulled over on highways. People gathered in streets, on rooftops, and in fields, staring upward. The air felt heavy with both wonder and fear. News stations broke into regular programming. Every screen on Earth displayed the same breathtaking sight, massive, shimmering ships hanging motionless in the blue. No one fired. No alarm sounded. The ships didn't attack. Instead, a calm, echoing voice spread across every radio, television, and digital device on Earth. The language was clear, perfectly translated into every human tongue at once. The voice introduced itself as a representative of a race called the Zorath. They said they came in peace. Their message was gentle and polite. They spoke of friendship, knowledge, and unity between worlds. They claimed they had watched humanity from afar and believed the human race had reached a point of maturity, ready to join the greater galactic community. For the first time in history, every nation listened to one single voice. Fear turned to curiosity, then hope. The world's leaders came together through emergency meetings, not to plan war, but to discuss peace. And within hours, the first direct contact was made. When the Zorath finally landed, they didn't look like the monsters from old science fiction movies. They had tall, lean bodies covered in faintly glowing patterns that moved like liquid light beneath their skin. Their eyes were silver and deep, reflecting everything around them. They didn't carry weapons. They moved slowly, gracefully, as if they didn't want to scare anyone. Cameras from every country broadcasted the meeting live. The moment was filled with emotion, tears, cheers, disbelief. It felt like humanity was stepping into a new chapter of history. The Zorath offered technology that could clean the oceans, cure diseases, and end hunger. They spoke about sharing wisdom, about building a new future together. At first, it all seemed too good to be true. Within months, the aliens started working closely with human scientists. They helped build huge energy centers powered by clean technology. They cured illnesses that doctors had struggled with for centuries. They brought hope to people who had lived their entire lives in struggle. Humanity began to see them as saviors, not visitors. But among all the joy and progress, there were a few who felt uneasy. They noticed small things, how the Zorath always smiled but never laughed, how their expressions never truly changed, how their eyes didn't blink. Some felt something cold behind their politeness, something watching, measuring. Governments started relying more and more on Zorath advisors. Their ideas shaped global policies, and slowly, the aliens began to guide humanity in the name of peace and balance. They spoke softly but carried invisible control. They encouraged nations to merge under a single world council for harmony. And people agreed. Why not? It sounded like unity. Soon Zorath-built machines hovered over cities, monitoring environmental stability. Cameras on every street became data collectors for progress. But they weren't just watching pollution levels, they were watching people. At first, no one questioned it. The world was changing so fast, and everyone was too excited to notice the cost of this new peace. Crime rates dropped, wars stopped, but freedom quietly faded. A few scientists began asking questions. They wanted to know why the Zorath needed access to deep earth minerals, or why they were sending large quantities of materials back to their ships. When those scientists tried to publish their findings, their work disappeared. Their research was deleted overnight. Some simply vanished. The Zorath claimed they had relocated the scientists for safety. The media believed them. The world believed them. The aliens spoke so kindly that even suspicion sounded foolish. People who doubted them were called paranoid, or worse, enemies of unity. Humanity didn't realize it yet, but their visitors hadn't come to build peace. They had come to build control. The Zorath saw humans as emotional, unpredictable creatures. They believed emotion was a weakness, something that would destroy any advanced civilization, so they decided to help humanity evolve by removing what they saw as flaws: fear, anger, grief, love. They started small. They created new education systems that taught calmness. Children were told to suppress feelings that caused conflict. Adults were told to think logically at all times. The Zorath promised it would end pain forever, and people listened, because who wouldn't want a world without pain? But without realizing it, humans were giving up what made them human, the very spark that made them strong. There were still a few who resisted, whispering in private, sharing old songs and stories that spoke of passion, courage, and love. They were small voices in a world slowly falling silent. The aliens continued to smile, proud of their progress. They believed they were saving humanity from itself. But deep down, they never saw the truth, that under the surface of this forced peace, something ancient and unbreakable still lived in the hearts of people. It was the same force that had carried humans through ice ages, wars, disasters, and endless struggle. It was the spark that refused to die, no matter how dark things became. And soon that spark would rise again. For now, though, the Zorath were certain they had succeeded. They stood in their shining halls above the cities, watching humans go about their lives like calm, obedient citizens. They thought the warlike past of this planet had been erased forever, but they didn't know history. They didn't know what it meant to push a human too far. Because even when humanity seems quiet, there's always a storm. Beneath the surface, a quiet strength waiting for the right moment to awaken, and that moment was coming. It would begin with one small act of defiance, one single event that would remind the galaxy of who humans really were, not monsters, not savages, but survivors, creatures who could endure anything, fight against the impossible, and rise from ashes with fire in their eyes. The Zorath thought they had brought peace. But soon they would learn they had only built the calm before the greatest storm in human history. Because when someone mistakes human kindness for weakness, they never live long enough to make that mistake twice. Months passed since the Zorath arrived. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Cities glowed with new energy systems that never ran out of power. The air was cleaner, and even the oceans were healing. Diseases that once terrified people had disappeared. On the surface, everything looked perfect. People smiled more, worked less, and lived longer. But behind that calm beauty, something felt different. It was as if the world had lost its heartbeat. The Zorath had become part of everyday life. There, tall glowing figures were seen walking beside humans in markets, schools, and offices. They spoke softly and never seemed angry. Their movements were slow and graceful, almost too perfect to be real. They always wore that same expression, gentle but unreadable, like they were watching something deeper than words. At first, everyone trusted them completely. After all, they had brought miracles. They gave Earth clean energy and medicines beyond imagination. But slowly, their requests began to change. They started asking for access to certain areas, mines, laboratories, even government databases. They said it was for research and cooperation. No one dared to say no. The world leaders believed the Zorath were helping humanity grow. And in some ways it was true. But there was something else. Something invisible, spreading quietly. The aliens had begun to influence how humans thought. Not through force, but through soft control. They created peace programs that taught emotional balance. People were told to stay calm at all times, to never act out of anger or fear. They said it was the path to enlightenment, a way to rise above primitive instincts. Slowly, schools changed. Children learned about logic and reason, but not about passion or art. They were told emotions were dangerous, that love and hate were both forms of imbalance. Even the old songs and poems, those filled with feelings, started disappearing. The Zorath said they were outdated and vibrated at a lower frequency. Most people accepted this without question. Life was peaceful after all. There was no crime, no war, no hunger. Who would want to disturb such harmony? But a few people noticed something strange. The more peaceful the world became, the quieter it felt inside. People laughed less. They smiled, but the smiles never reached their eyes. Even festivals and celebrations became dull, as if everyone was just pretending to be happy. The Zorath watched all this with quiet satisfaction. They believed they were saving humanity from itself. They called it The Great Alignment, a time when humans would finally let go of their chaos and become pure beings of logic. But not everyone agreed. In small hidden places, a few people still gathered in secret. They shared old stories about Earth's past, about bravery, sacrifice, and love. They whispered songs from generations before the aliens came. Those moments reminded them that humans weren't meant to live like machines. One night, in a small town surrounded by forests, a group of young people gathered around a fire. They didn't have any advanced tools or alien light crystals, just wood, flame, and their voices. They talked about how the world felt empty now, how even though everything was perfect, it didn't feel alive anymore. They didn't hate the Zorath. They just missed feeling human, but they didn't know that the aliens were listening. The Zorath had placed invisible drones all across Earth, tiny machines that could hear every word and record every heartbeat. They were monitoring humanity's emotions, searching for what they called emotional disturbance. Anyone who showed too much passion, anger, or sadness was quietly taken away for recalibration. People were told those taken had gone to learn peace in special centers. In truth, they were never seen again. Still, more humans began to sense that something wasn't right. They couldn't explain it, but they felt watched. They felt a kind of emptiness that no technology could fill. Parents noticed their children no longer dreamed the same way. The spark of imagination seemed dim. Some scientists started investigating on their own. They found strange energy readings beneath the new Zorath towers built in every major city. When they tried to share their findings, their access was suddenly cut off. Their names disappeared from the system. Their families were told they had left Earth on research missions. One quiet evening, the World Council, now half human, half Zorath, made a new announcement. It said that emotional expression would be limited in public places for the sake of stability. Public displays of grief, anger, or even excitement were seen as dangerous. Everyone was expected to remain calm, balanced, and neutral, and so the world grew silent. News anchors spoke with gentle smiles that never changed. People walked slower. Conversations became short and cold. The arts faded away. Paintings, music, and books that carried emotion were quietly removed. The Zorath said it was for the mental health of humanity, but under that silence, something powerful was building. Humans didn't forget easily. Deep inside, there was still a fire that the aliens couldn't understand. It was the same fire that had pushed their ancestors to cross oceans, build civilizations, and fight against impossible odds. That fire couldn't be erased. In small corners of the world, underground groups began to form. They called themselves Keepers of the Flame. They didn't use weapons or violence. They used stories, memories, and emotions. They believed that feelings were what made humans real, and that losing them meant losing everything. These groups began spreading messages through old communication methods, handwritten notes, whispered tales, even coded drawings. They reminded people of what it meant to feel alive. The Zorath started to notice signs of resistance. They couldn't understand it. How could humans still fight against peace? To them, it made no sense. They didn't realize that peace without freedom was just another kind of cage. The aliens discussed it among themselves. Some believed humans were simply too emotional to evolve. Others thought humans needed to be reconditioned even more deeply. The decision was made to tighten control. New machines were released, small floating spheres that followed people everywhere. They recorded emotions through facial expressions and body temperature. If someone showed signs of anger, frustration, or sadness, the machine reported it instantly. Those people were taken for treatment. Fear began to spread quietly. Families whispered at night, afraid to express love or pain even inside their own homes. But in that silence, the resistance grew stronger. Because the more the aliens tried to erase emotion, the more humans realized how precious it was. One day, something unexpected happened. A child, no more than 8 years old, stood in a public square and began to sing. It was an old Earth song, soft and full of emotion, the kind that made hearts ache and eyes fill with tears. People stopped to listen. Even the drones paused, unable to process what they were hearing. For a moment, everyone felt alive again. When the Zorath guards arrived to stop the singing, the crowd did something no one expected. They began to sing with the child. Hundreds of voices joined together, filling the air with sound and feeling. The aliens froze. Their systems couldn't understand the sudden burst of collective emotion. That moment, though small, became the first spark of rebellion, not of violence but of humanity itself. The Zorath didn't yet call it war. They called it a disturbance. But deep inside, they began to feel something they never expected from this quiet planet. They felt fear, because they realized that humans might not be as soft and fragile as they thought. The Zorath had made a mistake that would soon cost them everything. They had tried to control the one thing they could never truly understand, the human heart. And when the heart of humanity starts to awaken, nothing in the universe can stop it. The singing incident became the moment the Zorath would never forget. They tried to erase it from every network, every screen, every archive, but it was too late. People had seen it. They had felt it. That single song had awakened something deep inside humanity, something the aliens couldn't understand. The Zorath called it an emotional outbreak. To them, it was a flaw in the system. To humans, it was the first breath of freedom in years. After that day, small acts of defiance began to spread quietly across the world. People started to whisper again, to dream, to remember. Some left flowers on streets where the drones had taken loved ones. Others painted small symbols of hope on walls, symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. The aliens noticed. And they weren't pleased. They believed emotion was a disease that needed to be cured. Their council met inside the largest Zorath ship orbiting above Earth, its metal surface shining like a silver moon. They studied human behavior and decided to act. They called it the Great Correction. It began with restrictions. Entire neighborhoods were closed off. Communication networks went down in many regions. The Zorath said it was for security upgrades. They deployed more drones, more scanners, more watchful eyes in the sky. At first, humans didn't fight back. They were afraid. They had seen what happened to those who resisted before. But this time was different. This time the fear was mixed with anger, and anger, when born from love, can become something unstoppable. The truth finally came out when workers in a mining colony on Mars sent a message that was intercepted by the resistance. The Zorath weren't helping humanity. They were using Earth's resources for something else. Deep inside their ships, they were creating weapons, machines designed to reshape entire planets. They were preparing to make Earth their own. When the resistance learned this, they knew peace was over. They sent the message secretly across Earth, using old radio frequencies and simple paper notes passed from hand to hand. It said only one thing: they're not our friends. The world changed overnight. In a small mining colony on Mars, human workers refused to hand over the minerals the Zorath demanded. They said they had given enough. The aliens warned them once. Then, without hesitation, they attacked. A bright flash lit the red skies of Mars. In seconds, the colony was gone. Thousands of humans vanished in fire and dust. The Zorath called it a necessary correction, but they didn't expect what happened next. The news reached Earth despite their efforts to hide it. People cried not only for the lost lives, but because the truth could no longer be denied. The peace they believed in was built on lies. The Zorath appeared on every global screen. Their silver eyes looked calm as always. They said humans had made a mistake, that resistance only caused harm. Their voices were soft, but their message was cold. You are not ready to lead yourselves, they said. We will guide you. That was the moment when silence broke. Something inside every human heart snapped awake. For years, people had lived under control, their emotions dulled, their voices quiet. But now the fire returned. It started in small places, villages, towns, hidden bases, and then spread like a storm. No one gave orders. No leader called for war. It wasn't about power or pride. It was about freedom. Families began hiding from patrol drones. Farmers stopped sharing food with Zorath supply centers. Engineers started secretly modifying alien devices, trying to understand their technology. Artists, musicians, and storytellers began spreading hope again. And deep beneath the ground, in old tunnels and forgotten bunkers, the resistance began to grow stronger. They didn't have the weapons the Zorath had. They didn't have their ships or their energy fields. But they had something more powerful: the will to fight for home. People who had never held a weapon before began learning. They trained in secret using whatever they could find. Old soldiers, scientists, and workers came together like one heartbeat. Nations that had once been enemies now stood side by side. For the first time in history, humanity was truly united. The Zorath watched all this unfold with disbelief. They couldn't understand why humans fought so hard. They thought humans feared pain, feared loss. They couldn't see that it was those very things that made humans dangerous, because when humans lose everything, they become capable of anything. The aliens sent warnings. Then they sent armies. But they didn't realize that they had already lost the one thing that had made them strong: the illusion of control. The first human counterstrike wasn't big. It came from a group of engineers who hacked into a Zorath energy tower in the middle of the desert. They redirected its power, causing it to overload. The explosion was seen for miles. When people saw it, they didn't see destruction. They saw hope. It meant the Zorath could be hurt. After that, more strikes began. Small, quiet, clever ones. The resistance learned to fight in shadows, not with strength but with creativity. They built weapons from scraps, used Zorath tools against them, and moved like ghosts through their surveillance grids. The aliens began losing patience. They called humans irrational creatures driven by chaos. They thought fear would break them, but every attack only made humans more determined. Every loss became a reason to fight harder. For the first time, the Zorath realized what they were truly dealing with. A species that didn't surrender, no matter how hopeless things looked. In one battle near the edge of Earth's orbit, human pilots flying stolen alien crafts managed to destroy a Zorath supply ship. It wasn't a huge victory, but it shook the entire alien command. How could a species that only recently discovered space travel defeat their ships? The answer was simple. Humans learned faster than anyone expected. They adapted, improvised, and evolved within days. What took the Zorath centuries to master, humans copied in weeks. They didn't follow rules. They created their own. That was the difference. As the months passed, the war spread across space. The skies above Earth turned into glowing storms of light as ships clashed and burned. But even as destruction filled the stars, the people below didn't lose hope. They built shelters, grew food, and helped one another survive. They didn't wait for heroes. They became their own. The Zorath had always believed emotion was weakness. But now they saw that love could become courage. Grief could become strength, and anger could become fire. They had underestimated the human spirit. The resistance began broadcasting a simple message across every hacked channel, every frequency, every hidden network. It said, "We are not fragile. We are not peaceful. We are human." Those words became the heartbeat of the rebellion. Even in cities still under alien control, people whispered the phrase to each other in the dark. It gave them strength when everything else seemed lost. The Zorath responded with greater force, sending their most powerful ships to Earth's orbit. They wanted to end the rebellion before it grew too large, but by then it was already too late. The fire had spread too far. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. It wasn't a war of conquest or greed, it was a fight for identity. Humans weren't trying to destroy the Zorath. They were fighting to prove what it meant to be alive. The aliens had made one mistake, a simple one but fatal. They thought humans wanted peace above all else. They didn't understand that humans didn't want peace without freedom. And now, that misunderstanding would cost them everything. The Zorath had declared war on the one species in the universe that never gave up, no matter how impossible the odds. They had thought humans were peaceful, gentle, easily controlled. They were wrong. Because beneath that gentle surface, humans carried the memory of every battle, every sacrifice, every struggle their ancestors had ever faced. It was in their blood, in their bones, in the way they stood back up after every fall. The Zorath were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The time of silence was over. The world that once welcomed the aliens with open arms was now preparing to send them back where they came from, if it had to be done. One ship at a time, and somewhere, far above the planet in the blackness of space, the first human fleet, small, imperfect, but determined, was ready to rise. This was no longer about survival. It was about showing the universe what happens when someone mistakes humanity's kindness for weakness. The war had begun. It wasn't official, and there were no declarations, no ceremonies, no flags, but everyone knew. The moment humans struck back, even in small ways, the world changed forever. The Zorath ships filled the skies like dark clouds, and for the first time, humanity saw what real power looked like. Their ships were massive, shining with light that could cut through the night. Their weapons could silence a city in seconds. And yet, despite all that, they didn't understand one simple truth. Humans don't stop fighting once they believe in something. The resistance was growing faster than the Zorath expected. People from every corner of the world joined. Soldiers, farmers, engineers, even artists all came together. It didn't matter who they were or where they came from. Everyone had one purpose: to take back their freedom. Deep underground, in hidden tunnels and old military bases, groups worked day and night. Scientists who once worked with the Zorath started sharing what they knew. They studied captured alien devices and learned how they functioned. Slowly, humans began building their own versions, less advanced, but more creative. That was something the Zorath could never match: human imagination. They could copy designs, but they couldn't copy the spark that came from desperation, from hope. In one cold night, under the ruins of what used to be a great city, a group of engineers managed to make the first human-made energy weapon using pieces of a broken alien drone. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The weapon hummed with strange light, and for a moment, everyone in that dark tunnel smiled for the first time in months. It meant they had a chance. The Zorath still thought humans were weak. They didn't see this as a war, only a rebellion that would fade away with time. They called humanity emotional beings acting out of fear. But emotion was the very thing that made humans dangerous. It gave them a reason to keep going even when logic said to give up. The aliens didn't know that pain can become strength when it has a purpose. The resistance grew bolder. They struck supply routes, sabotaged towers, and stole information. They were never in one place for long. The Zorath tried to crush them with force, but every time they thought they had won, another group would rise somewhere else. It was like trying to fight the wind. You could feel it, but you couldn't catch it. Meanwhile, the humans living under Zorath control continued their quiet acts of defiance. Workers delayed tasks, children drew secret symbols of resistance, and people shared food and shelter even when forbidden. Every act, no matter how small, mattered, because resistance isn't always about fighting. It's about not giving up who you are. The Zorath started to realize they had underestimated humanity. They saw humans adapting faster than any species they had ever encountered. Every weapon used against them was soon turned into something the humans could use. The aliens couldn't understand how people with so little could achieve so much. One of their leaders even said, "They are unpredictable." But unpredictability was humanity's greatest weapon. The turning point came when a group of young scientists discovered something hidden in the Zorath technology. It wasn't just energy, it was thought. Their machines weren't powered by fuel, but by a living form of mental control. It allowed them to link ships, drones, and communication through a shared consciousness. And that gave humans an idea. If they could disrupt that connection, they could blind the Zorath armies even for a short time. It would be risky, but they were running out of options. The plan became known among the resistance as the Awakening. In secret bases all across the planet, humans prepared. Old satellites were reprogrammed. Broken ships were repaired using whatever parts they could find. People worked without rest. They didn't have much time, and they knew many of them wouldn't survive. But they didn't care. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for the right to be free again. On the night before the operation, the resistance gathered in silence. There were no speeches, no grand words, just quiet faces, tired but determined. Some looked up at the sky, where the Zorath ships floated like silver ghosts. Others whispered prayers not for themselves, but for the world they hoped to save. When dawn came, the operation began. The signal from the resistance was sent through hidden channels, bouncing between old satellites and underground relays. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then one by one, the Zorath ships in orbit started flickering. Their lights dimmed. Their communication cut off. For the first time, the Zorath fleet was blind. It lasted only minutes, but that was all humanity needed. During that short window, human pilots launched their first real counterattack. They used small, fast ships built from both human and alien parts. They didn't have heavy firepower, but they had speed, and they had courage. The battle that followed was chaos, light, smoke, and fire filled the sky. The Earth's upper atmosphere became a storm of explosions and debris. Every pilot knew the chances of survival were low, but none of them turned back. From the ground, people watched the sky burn. They didn't know who was winning, but for the first time they felt hope. And then it happened. A massive Zorath ship, one that had hovered above Earth for years, began to fall. It burned through the atmosphere, crashing into the ocean with a sound that echoed for miles. The Resistance had done it. They had destroyed one of the alien command ships. It wasn't the end of the war, but it was the moment that proved humanity could fight back. Across the world, people cried, shouted, and hugged each other. Some fell to their knees, thanking whatever force watched over them. For the first time in a long while, they believed victory was possible. The Zorath were stunned. They couldn't understand how such a small, unorganized species had managed to defeat even one of their great ships. Their logic couldn't explain it because logic couldn't measure heart. The humans didn't fight because they wanted to win. They fought because they refused to lose. That night, the Zorath met in silence. Their leader looked out at the planet below, covered in clouds and smoke. "We gave them peace," he said. "And they chose war." But he was wrong. Humans didn't choose war. They chose to live free, even if it meant fighting for it. The following days were filled with both chaos and courage. The Zorath retaliated, but they no longer had the same calm confidence. They were frustrated, angry. For the first time, they showed emotion, the very thing they had always tried to erase. They didn't realize it yet, but they were beginning to change too, because contact with humanity was changing everything. The Zorath were learning fear. They were learning what it meant to care about survival, about pride, about something bigger than logic. They didn't understand these feelings, and that made them even more dangerous. But humans didn't stop. They repaired ships, trained new fighters, and pushed harder every day. The world was battered and scarred, but it was alive again. The fire inside people's hearts had returned, burning brighter than ever. Even those who had once followed the aliens began to turn against them. They saw now that peace without freedom was only another kind of prison. In one quiet corner of the planet, an old farmer looked at the sky, saw the broken alien ships falling like stars, and whispered, "They thought we were weak." And somewhere out there among the stars, the Zorath finally began to understand their mistake. They had thought humans were predictable. They had thought emotions were flaws. But now they saw the truth. Emotion was power. It was the source of everything that made humans unstoppable. Pain made them brave. Love made them strong. Hope made them impossible to destroy. And that realization shook the aliens to their core. They had declared war on a species that could never truly be conquered. Humanity wasn't the smartest, fastest, or strongest race in the galaxy, but they were the most relentless. No matter how hard they were hit, they always got back up. The Zorath had started this war thinking they would teach humans how to evolve. Instead, they were about to learn what it truly meant to be alive. The message spread fast through every base, every hidden command center, and every underground lab. Humans had finally struck back. The small but powerful counterattack near Jupiter had done something no one thought possible. For the first time, a Zorath fleet was destroyed by human hands. The aliens, who had mocked and looked down on humans since the day they arrived, now faced something they could not understand: defiance from a species they once called weak. At first, most of the world didn't even believe the reports. People thought it was a rumor, or maybe some exaggerated military broadcast to boost morale. But then the footage came out, shaky, raw, and real. It showed 3 small human ships built in secrecy from scavenged alien metal, slicing through the cold void of space. Their engines glowed blue, their pilots silent but determined. They moved differently than Zorath ships, unpredictable and wild. And when the first missile hit the alien flagship, a flash brighter than lightning filled the screen. For a moment, the entire planet stopped. Every human watching, soldier, farmer, child, or elder, felt something deep inside their chest. It wasn't just pride. It was hope. The kind that could make tired hands lift weapons again. The kind that could make a broken world believe. The Zorath, however, were stunned in disbelief. They couldn't understand how a species with such limited technology could inflict real damage. Their commanders gathered in holographic meetings, voices sharp with confusion. "How?" one demanded. "Their systems are primitive." Another answered coldly. "They learn. Too fast. In hidden bunkers and orbiting stations, human engineers worked day and night. They had taken pieces of alien wreckage, studied them, and turned them into new weapons and defenses. But beyond all the machines and codes, it was the spirit of people, their endless creativity, that gave them the edge. Humans didn't follow rules in battle. They improvised. They turned weaknesses into traps, mistakes into strategies. Still, the cost was heavy. Many brave pilots never returned. Some ships never made it past the asteroid belt. But no one gave up. Every name lost was carved into the walls of underground bases, reminders of what was at stake. When someone felt fear, they'd look at those names and whisper, "We fight for them." As more victories followed, even small ones, the aliens began to change their tone. The Zorath no longer called humans peaceful. They started calling them unpredictable, dangerous. They watched in silence as human resistance grew faster than they could suppress it. In one meeting aboard their mothership, the alien High Council debated their next move. One elder spoke, her voice metallic but trembling. "We misread them. Their weakness is their strength." Another argued, "Then crush them now before they adapt further." But deep inside, fear had already started to grow within the Zorath. On Earth, unity reached levels never seen before. People who once fought over borders, power, and money now worked side by side. Scientists shared discoveries freely. Soldiers from different nations trained together. Artists painted murals of the battles. Songs were written about fallen heroes, and every broadcast carried the same message: humanity was not done yet. Even in ruined cities, life continued. Children played in the shadows of broken buildings, pretending to be pilots or engineers. "When I grow up," one said, "I'll build a ship faster than light." The adults smiled, their hearts heavy but proud. The world might be wounded, but it was alive, stronger than ever. Meanwhile, human scouts had begun pushing beyond the solar system, seeking the Zorath's weak points. They learned that the aliens depended heavily on centralized communication hubs. Destroy those and the invaders would be blind. The plan was risky, maybe suicidal, but the humans agreed. They had nothing left to lose. One night, deep under the icy plains of Greenland, a small team gathered in a dimly lit command room. Maps glowed on the screens, showing alien routes and defense grids. A voice spoke quietly. "If this works, we cut their control lines. They'll be forced to retreat." Another voice answered, steady and calm. "And if it doesn't?" A faint smile. "Then we go down fighting, just like humans always have." The operation began before dawn. Fleets rose silently from Earth's orbit, engines burning pale blue. The Zorath didn't detect them at first. The humans had learned how to mask their signals using a trick involving radio bursts and solar interference. By the time the aliens realized what was happening, the human ships were already in formation, heading toward a Zorath relay station near Saturn's rings. The battle that followed was fierce. The aliens fought with superior firepower, but humans fought with something else: instinct. When alien lasers locked onto one ship, another darted into their blind spot. When an explosion tore through debris, human pilots used it as cover. The fight lasted hours, maybe longer. No one on Earth slept that night. Every screen, every radio station broadcast fragments of the clash. Static mixed with voices shouting commands, cries, and silence. Then the signal came through. Target destroyed. The cheer that followed wasn't just a sound, it was a roar that spread across continents. For the first time, Earth had crippled the enemy's command line. Alien fleets started losing coordination. Their ships drifted, confused, unable to receive orders. The humans had done it. The Zorath commander, enraged and desperate, watched his fleet falter. He finally understood that the humans were not just another primitive species. They were survivors. Their emotions, their chaos, their stubborn hope. It made them impossible to predict and even harder to defeat. In a last-ditch effort, the aliens launched a massive strike aimed directly at Earth's orbit. The sky burned with trails of descending fire. But humanity was ready this time. Defense grids activated, energy shields flickered to life, and missiles rose like thunder. What followed was chaos and courage mixed together. Humans fought not as soldiers from separate nations, but as one people defending their only home. When the dust settled, both sides were scarred. But humans still stood. They had proven that no power, no weapon could crush their will. The aliens withdrew temporarily, regrouping in the outer system, leaving behind silence and scattered wrecks. In that quiet aftermath, survivors looked up at the stars. They knew this wasn't the end. The final battle was coming, and it would decide everything. But now, for the first time, humanity had shown the galaxy who they truly were. They were not peaceful out of weakness. They were peaceful because they had learned the cost of war. But when forced to fight, they became something no one could ever conquer. The Zorath had thought they were teaching humans a lesson in obedience. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and unstoppable. And every human knew, deep inside, that this fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was to remind the universe what it truly meant to be human. Because now the whole galaxy had seen what happened when someone declared war on the worst possible species, the ones who refused to die quietly, the ones who turned pain into power, the ones who smiled even in the fire. And somewhere in the cold darkness beyond Saturn, the alien commander whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "We thought they were fragile." He looked out at the wreckage of his fallen ships, glowing faintly in the distance, and added softly, "Big mistake." The sky was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the silence that comes after a long storm, the kind that feels heavy, filled with stories of both loss and survival. Earth had survived the worst attack in its history. Cities were damaged, oceans carried wreckage, and entire regions still glowed faintly from the fires of the war. But despite all that, people were alive. Humanity had not been erased. The world slowly began to rise again, one day at a time. The alien ships that had hovered above Earth for months were gone now, some destroyed, some retreating into deep space. The Zorath had finally realized that they could not win this war. They had faced a species that fought differently, that never surrendered even when all hope seemed gone. And that realization changed everything. In every corner of the world, humans started rebuilding. Soldiers became builders, scientists became teachers again, and people began planting trees in the same soil that had been turned to ash. The world didn't return to the way it was before. It became something new. People spoke to each other differently now. They no longer saw themselves as divided by borders or flags. They saw themselves as one kind, human. But far beyond the recovering Earth, in the cold blackness of space, the Zorath command ship drifted silently. Inside, their leader sat alone, replaying recordings of the war. Every moment of resistance, every human victory, every act of defiance. How did they win? He whispered to himself. We had the power, the knowledge, the control. Yet the answer was something he could not understand. He watched a final video, footage of a human pilot smiling just before launching his last missile. There was no fear in that face, only determination. They fight with emotion, one Zorath officer had said earlier. They fight for each other, not for orders. That was the truth the aliens could never grasp. On Earth, humans didn't celebrate victory with arrogance. There were no grand parades or huge speeches. Instead, people stood in silence and remembered those who didn't return. Families held pictures of their loved ones, whispering their names to the wind. Around the globe, a new promise spread. Never again would they be unprepared, and never again would they let anyone mistake their kindness for weakness. As months passed, the remains of alien technology were studied and carefully reused. Scientists found ways to adapt it for peaceful purposes, curing diseases, restoring damaged ecosystems, and powering homes. What had once been a weapon of destruction was now a tool for healing. It was a strange form of poetic justice, turning the invaders' power into something good. Still, there was one thing every person knew deep down. The Zorath weren't gone forever. Somewhere out there, they were regrouping, watching, and maybe even learning. But if they ever came back, they would find a world united, stronger than before. One day, the leaders of the new world met in what was left of the old United Nations Hall. The building had cracks in its walls, and its roof still bore scars from the war, but that made the meeting even more meaningful. People from every nation sat together, and one of them spoke, his voice calm but firm. We have seen what we can do when we stand as one. Let's not forget it. Let this be the beginning of a world where we fight only when we must, and only to protect life. The others nodded in agreement. That day, Earth's nations dissolved their old rivalries and created something new, the Human Alliance. It wasn't about power or territory. It was about survival, unity, and shared destiny. They built new ships, not for war, but for exploration, to reach out into the stars as equals, not as prey. Soon, the first mission beyond the solar system was ready. A fleet of silver ships lifted off from a rebuilt spaceport, carrying explorers, scientists, and engineers. As they rose into the sky, people on the ground watched in silence, their faces glowing with pride. The mission's purpose wasn't revenge, it was understanding. Humanity wanted to learn more about the universe and to make sure no other species suffered the same kind of fear and domination they once faced. Back in orbit, a quiet memorial floated, a simple beacon that sent out a message into space every few minutes. It said, "We are the children of Earth. We are peaceful, but we are not weak. We remember." The signal traveled endlessly into the dark, a reminder to any who might listen. Years passed and the scars of the war began to fade. Children grew up hearing stories of the time humans fought the aliens. To them, it sounded like an impossible tale, a story of courage, of ordinary people standing up against impossible odds. But for those who had lived through it, the memories never faded. The sound of sirens, the sight of burning skies, the trembling of the ground, it all stayed somewhere deep inside. Yet even with those memories, there was gratitude. Humanity had learned something priceless. That strength wasn't just about weapons or power. It was about unity, courage, and compassion. The very emotions the aliens mocked had saved them. In one of the rebuilt cities, a teacher stood before a classroom of young students. She pointed to a holographic image of the old Earth before the invasion and said softly, "This is who we were. And this," she said, changing the image to a bright, restored planet, "is who we became." The children listened in awe as she told them about the people who never gave up. "Remember this," she said, "kindness is not weakness, and peace is not surrender. They are choices made by the strong." In deep space, the Zorath Empire remained quiet for many years, but their historians and philosophers began to write about humanity. They called them the relentless ones. Some among them even began to question their old ways. Perhaps, one alien scholar wrote, "We misjudge them because we do not feel what they feel. Perhaps it is emotion, not logic, that keeps life alive." The galaxy changed because of what happened. Other alien species who had watched from a distance began to respect humans, not just for their victory, but for how they carried themselves afterward. They saw a race that could forgive, rebuild, and still look toward the stars with hope. Back on Earth, as night fell and stars filled the sky, people often looked up and remembered those who fought so humanity could stand free. In every city, a small flame burned in honor of the lost. Some whispered quiet prayers. Others simply stood in silence. The war had changed them all, but in a way that made them better. And somewhere, floating beyond the edge of human reach, a damaged alien ship picked up a faint transmission. The same message Earth had been sending for years. "We are the children of Earth. We mean no harm. But if harm comes, we will rise." The alien listening paused and replayed the signal again. There was no anger in his eyes, only understanding. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar: respect. Back on Earth, life continued. The oceans healed, forests grew, and cities turned green again. Humanity had learned to live not just for themselves, but for generations to come. They had looked into the face of destruction and chosen creation instead. And as the winds blew gently across the quiet lands, the world seemed to whisper its own message to the stars. "We were peaceful once, and we will be again. But never mistake that peace for weakness." The galaxy would remember those words for centuries, because that was the day the universe learned the truth. Humans were not just survivors. They were the spark that refused to die, the heart that never stopped beating, and the voice that could turn fear into strength. The war was over, but the legend had only just begun.